Good day, folks, and welcome to the Anorak Review Show. I, your host, the Anorak. While we're still on the subject of celebrating albums turning 40, let's talk about another classic band I've been wanting to talk about for quite a while now, the Dire Straits. Despite no longer being around as a group, the Dire Straits still managed to stand the test of time to this day, which with singles such as The Sultans of Swing and Money for Nothing being among one of the more popular songs. But for now, we're going to talk about one album of theirs that came out somewhere in between, with 1982's Love Over Gold. The cover is just awesome. A simple yet bold bolt of lightning flashing across and lighting up the otherwise dark cloudy imagery, giving off a sharp bathe of blue light. And on the back cover, we see that continue in this black and dark blue motif as we see what looks like a blue flame or smoke, as well as an old monochrome screen from like an old computer monitor sticking out in the otherwise pitch darkness. Altogether, visualizing the tone of this album and its music. It's simple, while at the same time striking. Pun may or may not be intended. Anyways, let's see if the music itself actually lives up to such a gritty cover. We begin this album with Telegraph Road. This 40-minute ballad was inspired by a long journey where the band's tour bus had travelled through the US Route 24, which is often known in the state of Michigan as Telegraph Road. Why it's called that, I don't know. Probably has a lot of pylons along the way. Anyways, it starts off with a faint yet high-pitched synth, this sweet melody between a piano, possibly by keyboardist Alan Clark, and an acoustic guitar by the frontman himself, Mark Knopfler, or probably fellow member Hal Linz. Then it somewhat picks up with an electric guitar as Mark actually begins singing in that distinct dreary tone of his about a man who, a long time ago, walked down this track for 30 miles with a sack on his back. Pretty impressive. He must have a lot of energy and carbohydrates in order to travel on foot for that long a distance. He then dropped to this load, built himself a cabin and a winter shop, making himself at home in the wilderness. And soon enough, other travellers came along to build and expand upon the area, with churches, schools, lawyers, and rules. Apparently, they built steampunk-style androids to act as lawyers. Who knew? And with a track whose length is on par with the songs from Yes's Close to the Edge, there's bound to be several instrumental bits and solos in between the vocal parts. And this song sure does have such. From piano solos straight into guitar solos, it flows together so well, especially with its pacing. It ranges from light and upbeat to slow and emotional. Later on, the verses go into slight detail about how all these jobs and opportunities that were once seen as plentiful were now getting closed down one by one. One possible reason could be due to cold weather, when one voice says, "My radio says tonight it's gonna freeze." That or his car radio is trying to tell our protagonist that it's getting condensation buildup from being out in the cold for much too long, especially late at night. This track pretty much sums up the rise and eventual fall of civilization, how we build ourselves up and how inevitably soon we will always fall down from it. Made very clear in the last line of the song, saying, "From all these signs saying, sorry but we're closed, all the way down the Telegraph Road." And said instrumental sections showing and demonstrating the passage of time within this otherwise quiet little town of quiet little people. And keep in mind, this was back in the early 1980s, when Margaret Thatcher was still in the early years of her time as Prime Minister. And considering how long this track has mentioned the mines, the ore, the hard times, and a war, that's a pretty interesting connection. It's honestly kind of bittersweet in such a respect. Aside from all that, though, this is still a very simple yet very deep and grand scale track. It really feels like being in a bus or the backseat of a car, looking out through a window and seeing all the towns and fields, pylons and telegraph utility poles pass on by, while time itself is preemptively stuck in this eternal blue-hour sky. I definitely recommend listening to this, especially if you're driving on a long journey yourself on a motorway or dual carriageway. It's a very enriching experience. Then side 1 ends with the other track and possibly one of my favorite Dire Straits songs, Private Investigations. To me, this is the core and center of the Love Over Gold album, and it's Dire Straits at their best and most atmospheric. It's what I like to call minimalist rock, starting with a deep-pitched synthesizer chord before leading into this slow piano progression accompanied by a soothing classical sounding guitar. Then Mark speaks a few verses in that usual deep pantone of his, saying that it's a mystery to me, and the game commences. It's a mystery, of course, in that he had forgotten how the controls work in this video game. He has confidential information in a diary, a little black book that also has his poems in it. The music and lyrics together have this kind of film noir vibe to it, like Mark's playing the role of a detective or something, like Dick Tracy or Eddie Valiant. Checking out reports, digging up dirt, meeting all sorts in this line of work, but mostly digging up dirt literally. What have you got at the end of the day? What have you got to take away? A bowl of whiskey, a new set of lies, blinds on a window, and a pain behind the eyes. It seems Mark needs some clear eyes. After all, Ben Stein says it's awesome and removes redness. And after the last few spoken lines, plus a title drop, we then get into this slow, quiet, and suspenseful bassy instrumental beat, with a bit of call and response between Mark's acoustic guitar and possibly a marimba or a vibraphone by Mike Maynard. I must have probably butchered that name wrong. I'm always butchering people's names, aren't I? You can also even hear a few sound effects in the background, like some shoes sweeping across the ground or against it, and possibly a glass bottle smashing like far away or something. And if something like that ain't enough to startle you even a little bit at least, we then hear what sounds like a gun cocking and a loud chord like a jump scare. We get some pretty epic piano chords and striking guitar chords that just up the intensity of this track. This is a song that might either make you feel relaxed or unsettled. It could easily be used as a theme for like a detective film or a crime thriller. This is an awesome and epic track. Go listen to it in a mostly dark room, maybe with a dim or single source of light like a screen or a lamp, or maybe better yet, listen to it while out for a stroll when the sun's already setted and it's dark all around and you just bathed under the lights of lamps, like street lights and whatnot. You would no doubt be immersed in that experience. Side 2 begins with Industrial Disease, a somewhat lighter and more funky track compared to the previous two, slightly more reminiscent of 50s rock and roll like Chuck Berry or Little Richard. The bass of John Illsley and drums of Phil Withers do eventually show here, plus that little opening organ and Mark's half-talky vocals do remind me a bit of Hugh Cornwell and the Stranglers. Here he talks about warning lights flashing down at quality control, and that somebody had thrown a spanner only to be thrown himself in a hole. 2 months to be exact. Or am I being obtuse? Then rumours start to spread in the loading bay that someone blew a whistle and the whole walls came down. Must be a pretty strong whistle to produce that kind of force. and after a meeting in the boardroom, they tried to trace the smell until they found a leaking in the washroom as well as a sneak in personnel, as somewhere in the corridors, someone was heard sneezing, before Mark questions if this could be industrial disease. Maybe so, but then again, it could also be instant death disease. I have been waiting so long for the opportunity to make that reference. Points to you if you actually remember that. Ain't that right, Agent Mays? Some of us at the Foundation are still investigating that, by the way. We still don't know exactly how the hell it can make people's insides and organs disintegrate and disappear just from mentioning the mere name of the disease itself. And this isn't even the t-shirt I usually wear. He means yes. Anyways, the title itself is actually apparently a term used here in the UK to refer to any particular disease and illness that may be struck in the workplace, which too was something somehow prevalent at the time. Like with Telegraph Road, this song entails the fast development and eventual decline of the manufacturing and other modern industries in everyday life, and how one can easily be overworked to the points of stress and illness, in more ways than one, of course, and the potential strikes, economic collapses, and other things that may come as consequential results. It deconstructs the monotony and repetition of the typical working 9-to-5 routine. In the middle of the song, the narrator visits a Dr. Parkinson's, no doubt a doctor of Parkinson's disease. Or he's Sir Michael Parkinson, seems just as likely. And in this analysis, Dr. Parkinson mentions that his patient has brewer's drop from drinking beer. Brewer's droop being a slang, of course, for erectile dysfunction, as well as the name of a pub band that Mark and Pick were members of before founding the Dire Straits. And while the song may not be as grandiose as, say, Sultans of Swing or Private Investigations, it's still a very fun and catchy track, and thematically, it could be relevant to this day and age. After all, could COVID be an industrial disease? Who knows? Afterwards is the title song, Love Over Gold. After the bright and funkiness of industrial disease, we then switch into something a bit more soothing and relaxing, yet almost solemn and serene, with another piano-centric intro with that classical guitar gain and those whimsical pluck sounds produced by a synthesizer to boost. This well may be my second favourite song from this album, behind Private Investigations, just from a musical standpoint alone. As for a lyrical standpoint, this jazzy track centers around a standoffish yet fragile female figure, who Mark describes in the second person as walking on the high rise, a dancer on thin ice, paying no heed to any danger. Dancing on the thin ice of modern life, no doubt. So let's get dangerous. He then goes on to say that while this person may acknowledge her sins, she still throws her love to all the strangers and caution to the wind. Likely a sin of adultery and promiscuity, especially without any regard for potential consequences. She goes on dancing through doorways just to see what she'll find, leaving nothing to interfere. Although that could just well be describing me when I get to wash the dishes all by myself and no one else is around while I'm listening to my music. Actually, a good chunk of the lyrics here were said to be influenced by Mark's ex-flame, Holly Beth Vincent, whose failed romance with Mark also served as inspiration for another Dire Straits song, Romeo and Juliet. Here, he expresses not necessarily bitter contempt and vendetta, but rather more pity towards her, how she may have never really loved him, only using his recognition as a means of boosting her own career in an insincere matter. It takes love over gold, as in actual loving care for other living people and individuals over loving greed over mere wealth and material values. Mind over matter to do what you do that you must when the things that you hold can fall and be shattered or run through your fingers like dust. Those last set of verses demonstrate very clearly how we must appreciate what we have, whether we take it or have it given to us, as if such things could easily expire. And funny enough, said verses are sung right in the middle of the track. Yeah, the other half of the song is pretty much entirely instrumental for the rest of it, and it's just as fantastic as the first half. Plus, we also get the return of Mike Meniere on vibraphone and or marimba, and it's just as good as on Private Investigations. Just listen to the song while relaxing outside during a very blue sunset. You will feel like gold just listening to this track. And so our album ends with It Never Rains. A decent enough closure to such a sensational record. Right off the start, this track is mainly dominated by a modest-sounding church-like organ, almost gospel-esque, plus a more country-sounding guitar as well. Then Mark sings that he could hear the 7 deadly sins and that the terrible twins came to call on you. Yes, the shining twins want you to come play with them, Danny. The bigger they are, babe, the harder they fall on you. Yes, that dog pile is going to be painful to you. And now, they've taken the chains and gears off your merry-go-round. Mostly because said gears and chains have gone all old and rusty, and they're going out to get fresh new replacements. And like with the previous song, this too is likely about Holly Vincent. But while that one expressed a sense of pity and regret, this one has a bit more bite to it, if you get my meaning, and he calls her out on possibly using other people as well. There's even a possible call out to the Romeo and Juliet song, when Mark mentions that your new Romeo was just a gigolo when he let you down. And after Mark sings the last line of, and he screws you down in Tin Pan Alley in the city of a billion dreams. Tin Pan Alley was an actual name for a place and a group of songwriters and publishers in New York City that had been around for most of the late 19th and early 20th century. We get another fantastic guitar solo for the remainder of the track, accompanied of course by that sweet backing organ, for nearly the last 3 minutes of the song before we fade out to a close, concluding the album as a whole. And that album, Love Over Gold, is simply great. The music's sensational, the lyrics have good meanings, and Mark's vocals are so distinct, channeling a bit of Bob Dylan now that I think about it. Plus, it's a very blue album, not just with its artwork, but the music itself as a whole gives off this blue feeling, not necessarily depressed or depressing, but rather atmospheric and even suspenseful. It's a very sophisticated record to say the least. It's both pop and experimental, in the lyrical themes and expanded music. If you're into 80s new wave, art rock, and lengthy tracks, I definitely recommend this. Believe me when I say this, you will love this gold album. Next time, we begin October and Anorak with a classic punk album by the Stranglers.